Hey, and welcome back to Content King. I'm Tony, your host, and today my goal is to persuade you to finally start that podcast you've been dreaming about. Because, spoiler alert, it's way easier than you think. How many of you think podcasting is too saturated, right? Everybody has one, and I'll never be discovered. Can I just tell you that it's not just about being discovered? Podcasting does 4 things. Ready? First, did you know that loyalty is not built through the number of times someone sees you, but the amount of time they spend with you? This is why these 1 to 2 hour podcasters have the most insanely loyal fans. That's why you grow so close to coworkers in an office. That's why we couldn't care less about the person in the viral TikTok. Sure, it's been viewed by 2 million people and maybe it's hilarious, so we've seen it 10 times, but you've now seen them for a total of like 2 minutes at this point. Contrast that with an interview you saw about processed foods and now you'll never touch a hot dog again, right? Because you watched it once for an hour. Do you see how time allows you to really convey emotion and really inspire action in your audience? Okay, second, podcasting establishes credibility. You all of a sudden have a platform, right? Podcasts nowadays are seen as their own businesses, and even just having one is good for your business. But even more than that, if you bring people who are experts in their field that bring value that you can't, the value is perceived as coming from you and your podcast, not just the expert. For instance, when I was struggling with managing my Crohn's symptoms when I was first diagnosed, I learned about this meditation that helped me lower my symptoms over time the more I did it. Where did I learn about this life-changing meditation? I forgot the guy's name, but I know it was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And side note on Joe Rogan, doesn't matter if you like the guy. We as podcasters study his success like nobody else. Game respects game. Rogan, he plays the podcast game so well. Anyway, third, podcasting also gives us another platform and an excuse to make more content. People are blown away when I tell them that content could actually be easier if you focused on long form like podcasting. And podcasting accomplishes this for me because on a podcast, I control every word out of my mouth, which means I can have a long video with 5 to 10 reels baked in, but that video can live on YouTube, as a video podcast on Spotify and all the other platforms. It can live as a blog. It gives me credibility. It helps me connect with my audience, and it gives me a reel per day of content that I can share on 5 platforms. Are you kidding? So here's some stats for you to drive this home. Did you know that half of all Americans over the age of 12 are listening to a podcast every month? Okay, but check this one out. I'm gonna give you 3 stats. The last one's what I want you to pay attention to. 80% of people who are scrolling reels will watch the whole video. That feels good because videos are usually only about a minute or 2 long. On YouTube, that goes down to about 50%. But podcasts, even if they're longer episodes, listeners are still listening to 80% of an episode. If you're not convinced yet, that alone should persuade you to try and upload every single YouTube video as a podcast. And lastly, podcasts don't function for purely content's sake, but podcasts can bring in leads like crazy. My friend Flo has a business, and most of her clients came from her podcast that she did not even run ads to. So before today, how many of y'all had plans to start a podcast? I'm telling you that the benefits are endless. It helps you get tight with your messaging. It can turn into a bartering chip when making deals or collaborations. It can also bring in ad revenue, right? It can become something that attracts others to work with you if they want exposure to your audience. And starting a podcast is much easier than you think. So remove that roadblock right now. I truly mean that anyone can start a podcast. Now, if you'd like to learn how, comment on this episode on Spotify or YouTube, and I will teach you how. Otherwise, thank you for listening. I'm Tony. This is Content King. And if you'd like to support this podcast for free, please consider reviewing this podcast in your podcast app. It would mean the world to me, as it would help get this podcast in front of more people. So thank you very much, and I will see you tomorrow.